this year, and that got done, and actually you got done early. You still had days on the clock. Is that right?
No. We finished actually with 2 hours early.
Okay.
We finished about an hour and a half, 10:30, and did pass it Friday morning. Much different than we thought when we passed. So the House actually passed the budget back in March, and then all this hit, and then found ourselves with a $2.6 billion hole we had to fill. So, but I tell you what, both the House and Senate, so Blake Tillery heads the appropriations with the Senate. He and Terry, it was nothing short of a miracle what they did. They are really to be commended. We were looking at furlough days. No state employees had to take furlough days. Hope and pre-K remain untouched. The school nutrition, as well as the education and transportation, were untouched. And kudos to our local county school board systems because of their fiscal responsibility. And then with the help of the federal CARES money, they were made whole. And I think it really only affected them a little less than 4%.
Right.
We'll let Senator Tillery talk about a lot of the details of the budget, but they really did. They did an incredible job.
What was the number there? 11 or 14? What was the final cut?
Actually, it was 10.
10. Wow.
We started out at 14%, and like you said, we went to 11, and literally, I think the day before we went back into session, the governor redid the revenue estimate down to 10%. So 1% doesn't sound like a lot, but it was a couple $100 million.
That was my next question.
Yeah.
What was the number on that?
I think it's around $260 million.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other bills that you did or didn't expect? Of course, the hate crime bill was passed.
Yeah. It was top of my list. Made a little cheat sheet here. So there was two bills that kind of went hand in hand, the hate crimes and the police protection bill. And actually, Georgia was only one of 4 states that didn't have a hate crimes bill. And I voted against it the first time, voted for it this time because things have changed. I still have a little problem with trying to prosecute thought process. But I understand why we need it. So a little mixed emotions on that. But at the same time, we passed a kind of emergency responder or first responder protection bill, so that almost like a miniature hate crimes bill for them, because there's now, as you know in the news, crimes being committed against them that really don't fit a particular, say, code section. And so, we wanted to show support for law enforcement as well. A couple other big things. So in education, we eliminated 5 of the milestone tests, and that's something that the teachers have been asking us for a long time, because when these teachers got into teaching, they were hoping they could teach. And so that was a big win for education, was eliminating some of those.
Well, there's cost involved with that, too, just to implement those.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. And but the time factor, especially with the breaks and where they landed, was such a big issue with the teachers because when the tests fell. And so they were, sometimes right after the break, and so they were having to back up some. Did a couple of things for broadband. And one of these was done back in March, where we limit the fees on pole attachments, which was a big fight between the EMCs and some of the other providers, but the give and take there was we allowed EMCs to get into broadband if they wanted to, but at the same time put some restrictions, because they basically had an unrestricted fee they could charge, which really was becoming unfair, especially in rural Georgia, where you had a lot of poles just to get to a house. And so there was a federal amount, and so we allowed up to 110% of that federal amount per pole. In medical, one of the big things that you probably heard a lot in the news was how Georgia ranked so bad in postpartum mother mortality rate. And so we extended the Medicaid provision from 2 months to 6 months. And so that was a really big bipartisan measure that the House led on, and had been working on that all year. Another big thing was the hemp bill, and we kind of needed this for three different areas because, number one, hemp started out as something that was illegal. And so now, with the federal relaxing the guidelines, Georgia needed to I guess, line up the regulations to meet the federal standards for that.
Now, is it for growing it for medicine or for other uses like rope and other things?
For any use, but it had to be under 0.3%, and so that's a very low threshold. And so, but at the same time, the federal it was kind of a volleyball. The feds started out with guidelines, said the states need to do something, but then the feds wouldn't approve our plan until we put some money in the budget. So we allocated about $250 million for that. And then made it where, and then there was a third thing we had to do with that, because when we passed the bill last year, or this year, March seems like last year now, when we passed that, we had some liberal cities and counties using that as a loophole to basically legalize marijuana. So we had Fulton and Gwinnett saying, well, we see you smell like marijuana, you got a bag of weed in your car, but hey, that could be hemp for all we know. So we're not going to prosecute that. And so this actually closed that loophole, and so they're going to have to find something else. Another thing we did was surprise medical billing, and man, this has been a struggle. Anytime you have a battle between insurance companies and doctors and outfits that are large in scope and in big industries, there's going to be a battle, and it seems like it's been really kind of like baby steps to get this done. So this was like step 4, but I think we are getting somewhere. And for those that don't know, surprise medical billing is when you go to the hospital, you ask all the right questions, they tell you what the procedure is going to cost, and then up to 6 months later you might get a bill from a provider
out of the blue.
Yeah, out of the blue, and it's usually very high because it's a out of network charge, but no one bothered to tell you. So now that information is going to be up front on a website for you to look at. In fact, it was kind of a creative way the way they did that. They did like because we're so used with Amazon and eBay and having a star rating system. So like a 3 or 4 star, because there's really 4 areas, and let's just say anesthesiology, because that's one of the main ones. And so now you can look and see if the folks you're going to be used is actually has a green or red by there to let you know if they're in network. And what that did, a lot of times we pass bills that have unintended consequences in a bad way. This surprisingly had an unintended consequence in a good way. This actually brought some of these out-of-network providers to the table with some of these hospitals who, regardless of which side didn't want to negotiate, now all of a sudden no one wants a red dot by their name.
Right.
So now all of a sudden everybody says, well, let's get us in network. So that, I think that's going to be a big deal. Yeah.
How did it end on Sine Die? I have this picture of the last day of school. Everybody's packed and ready to hit the road.
Yeah. Well, what's funny is, as you know, from watching, a lot of people tear up pieces of paper and, throw them in the air, and, Speaker said, look, we don't have that staff here today. Don't do that. So it ended in a very unusual, anticlimactic.
See you next year.
Yeah, exactly. See you in 6 months, which is kind of crazy too, because usually it's see you in 9 months. Do want to let people know that there's going to be a constitutional amendment on the ballot in November, and we've been trying to do this for several years. it will allow, you're going to be asked the question, should citizens be allowed to sue local and state governments when constitutional rights are violated?
Wow, that's a big one right there.
Yeah, and that sounds like an obvious yes, doesn't it? But when the folks that write the laws get to protect themselves, we just felt like this was a little bit of an unfair balance, and so that will be on the ballot, and I think everybody will support that. We did have one other thing that was local interest, because Wayne County is one of the top, I think, 5 timber producers, if I'm not correct. I know they're one of the largest, and because we found that out during the FLIPA money discussion.
Right. Yeah.
And so we passed a bill that helps our timber industry, basically realigning the Georgia building codes with international standards. Surprisingly, it's one of Georgia's biggest industries, but we were handicapping our own industry by not allowing them to use what's called mass timber. And I got to see some of this up in Atlanta. It's basically,
what is mass timber?
Yeah, so it is compressed wood that is as strong as steel. And if you can probably guess, as an outsider, you think, well, should we put up steel or we should put up wood? There'd be 2 reasons why you would gravitate towards steel. You would say, well, steel is stronger. Well, they've eliminated that through technology. The other thing you'd say is, well, steel won't burn, wood will. Well, this is a very slow, almost non-burn, almost like the insulation you put in your house. Again, don't ask me how or why, but technology figured that out. So they basically, the industry came up very creatively to overcome the 2 obstacles, which was, and really 3, cost, because as you know, wood is cheaper than steel. But even with adding the new technology and processes, it makes it a competitive situation for them. So that was a big win for South Georgia.
8:15 here at the Big Dog. Representative Bill Werkheiser, our guest this morning. Wednesdays with Werkheiser, last one until the first of next year. And how did it go with the mask situation? And I understand it was a longer voting process for you in the House than it was in the Senate because of numbers.
Yeah. And that was a little ironic, too. We've got 3 times as many members. So even if we had voted the same way, it would have taken us 3 times as long. But the Senate, after about a week, decided to go ahead and use their seats and vote with their buttons. Before session had started, the Speaker had put together a bipartisan committee with the majority leader and minority leader to come up with protocols, and they were adamant about the seating. So we ended up meeting in 3 different places. About half of us were down on the floor chamber, and that's where I was. The remaining half, so 25%, about half of those were up in the gallery, so they were above us. We could see them, and they had microphones. And then the other 25% was in a room down the hall, which used to be the old Supreme Court building. And so every single vote was done by roll call. And not only that, as they called your name alphabetically, your name would light up, and then if you missed, they would go back through it to catch you in case you were, in the hall or in the bathroom or something, which you don't get that opportunity when you're voting with your machine. So I actually timed it a few times. It was about an 8.5 minute process to vote on a measure instead of a 60-second.
They only give you 1 minute to hit your button. Is that
yeah,
what you're saying? Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
And in fact, and it's not an exact minute in the House. The Speaker basically calls for the vote. The bell rings, and actually probably less than a minute. Now in the Senate, it literally is. I think it's a minute and a half. You have to ask Senator Tillery on that. And what's interesting on ours, as we push our button, our name lights up in red or green.
Right.
And so we can, and that can kind of change the dynamics because when bills are flying, you're watching, experts in that field, that can be persuasive. Whereas in the Senate, they've got a minute and a half, and they've got a clock running, and the bell rings at 30 seconds and 15 seconds, and then they lock the machine, and the board lights up all at once, and then so boom, there's all the votes. So you don't get the just
play
see
by
how
play.
yeah, but there's hand signals and other stuff, so there's other ways of doing that. Want to really thank y'all for allowing me to do this every week. And I know, in case y'all don't hear it, a lot of people talk to us, and I'm amazed that when I'm going into the hardware store, the grocery store here, that how many people will mention an issue that was brought up on the show, and y'all have quite a following, and they've really enjoyed it, and I appreciate y'all allowing us to
Well,
to
we
do
appreciate you being here with us. Let's go back to the budget for just a second there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it started back in the Senate because you had already passed it and sent it to them. It didn't really start with the Senate, but that's where it was when the session was suspended. Is that right?
That's a great thing to bring up, Jonathan, because actually all appropriation bills have to start in the House. The House body is known as the Appropriators. And so traditionally, the governor will send out an estimate along with a 300-page book of what he'd like to see the budget start out as. And then the House takes that, and we literally spent we went in January 15th, last 2 weeks of January and all of February, basically before we even got it to the Senate, going over it with a fine-tooth comb, and then the Senate gets it, and then they start their massaging process. Well, that's when the world fell apart, and so we got sent home, and so it kind of laid on the table there for 3 months, and then by the time we got back, that's when Senator Tillery and the Appropriations Committee realized they had a big hole to fill. So basically, ripped up those 300 pages and started over. And so it was so unique in so many ways, because not only were we had an instant recession on our hands, Senator Tillery stepped into a new role that he hadn't. Jack Hill had been doing that for decades, and like I said, kudos to him. He never missed a beat, and received a lot of praise from those who were inside the process, from both budget office process, budget writers, and Terry England, who's been doing it for I think about 14 years. So he was very complimentary of how smart and thorough Senator Tillery was. Speaking of our delegation, Brent, when I was doing our list of bills, I kind of skipped over because we had talked about it before. Stephen Meeks carried the coal ash bill that he'd been working on for a couple of years, and so we were able to get an increase in the tipping fees on coal ash, and that was a big deal, because we were basically inviting out-of-state coal ash to be brought into Georgia with our low fees. So so that was a big win, really not only for Wayne County but for our entire state.
All right, 7% on vaping as opposed to a tobacco tax. Is that correct?
That is correct. And that was actually quite a battle. That was a 2-year battle. Bonnie Rich out of Marietta carried that. The two arguments there, that the pro-tax argument was it's a tobacco product. It should be treated the same way as cigarettes as far as the 7 or 8% sales tax. The anti-argument was when vaping first came out, it didn't have the strong nicotine. It was a device used to get people off cigarettes, and still is. And so people were arguing that we're penalizing people who are actually trying to get off cigarettes. And so, but that did pass, I think, the final day, actually about 9 or 10 o'clock, sine die. All
right, so you are unopposed this year, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
You and Stephen Meeks as well.
All three of us.
Return. All three of
you? Yeah,
us.
all three of us.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you, and that's quite a compliment to the district for allowing us to do that, because I told somebody a few weeks ago, every time I leave my driveway and see the first political sign, I say a quick thank you, God, for that I'm not involved in that process. It's it's grueling. It's a emotional, physical, grueling process to run for office, and so.
Representative Bill Werkheiser with us on Wednesdays with Werkheiser. The district, how does that? Last time I saw the map, doesn't it just kind of come down like 301 and pick up part of Jessup? Or
yeah, so my district is all of Evans County, starting at the top, and then all of Tattnall County. And as we come into Wayne, if you look at it on the map, it looks like a little finger just going across. And so if you looked at it geographically, you would think, well, I've only got like 5 or 7% of Wayne County. The reality is I've got half of Wayne County because I've got all of Jessup. So it goes down to 341 and runs. It's almost like a straight line right across the very top of Wayne County. And so Stephen Meeks and I share about half the district.
Right, because the way it's designed, I think I'm about a half mile from you in Stephen Meeks' district, the way it's mapped.
Yeah. And Stephen's been a great partner to work with, and I tell you this, one good thing about working with Stephen is when someone calls from Wayne County, if they've got a problem with the Georgia Department of Labor or Department of Revenue with their income tax refund hasn't come, we never ask, neither one of us, well, where do you live? Let me look up and see, whose district you are. We take care of them. We kind of, instead of seeing Wayne County split in population, we basically say, well, we both got the entire county covered. And so it's been a great partnership.
Can't let you go without asking about the traffic light at Joey Williams.
With the craziness that's going on, we did not have as much discussion. But I will tell you in the same breath that it was not forgotten. It was talked about, but it was talked about more during the January, February, March. We were hoping when we went back in January, we had, just like on the coal ash bill, we kind of got fault with the previous leadership, especially, we'll just say previous administration. And with the changes both with the governor and lieutenant governor, it gave us some new life there, and that's what helped us with the coal ash. And we thought the same thing would help us with the red light, but of course with the budget situation and everything else. So we will take another run at it. I appreciate you bringing that up. We certainly don't run from that issue, and we will take another run at it again.
Where were the cuts? Was it streamlining or attrition or? So
a lot of them, we had a lot of positions that were on the books as being open. So if you got a position in state, it's very different than run the business, which the only thing I've been familiar with in the last 30 years. So you have to fund a position first, advertise it, and you try to fill it. Well, we had tens of thousands of jobs unfilled all across. And so a lot of those cuts just took those positions away. And that way you're not taking your current employees and telling them to take a cut, or furloughing. And again, it was pretty amazing that we did this process without furloughing anybody, because if you remember back during Deal's recession, right after he came back in office, that was where a lot of the cuts were. They were furlough days. And speaking of that, one of the ways that the legislature got away from furloughing the folks, our staff at the Capitol, who make us look good and who are still working there today, they work year round. The legislature voted to take a 10% pay cut equal to the budget cut, to prevent our staff from having to take any furlough days. And like everything else up there, everything became political. That got voted on party lines. The Republican Party voted to cut our pay, and it was kind of I guess the statement was, if everybody else is going to suffer, we should take a hit too, even though, ours is kind of symbolic. Our pay's $17,000 a year, so it wasn't a big cut. So $1,700. So it was more making a statement. And then, the other party said, no, we don't make enough as it is. It's symbolic. So why are we doing symbolic stuff? So, unfortunately, everything if we voted is red or blue a better color, it would become. We have the ability to make everything partisan for some unfortunate reason. So,
well, that's the way politics works, unfortunately.
Yeah.
How can they get in touch with you, Bill?
So, great question. And before I tell you that, because I even wrote it down so I wouldn't forget, this is a great time because although we covered a lot, there's a ton of stuff. I would love to come speak at your Rotary Club, Kiwanis Club, Optimist, Garden Club, your church group. Would love to come speak to you. The easiest way to reach me is, instead of giving my government email, just because it's easier to remember, is bill@werkheiser.com. And my cell phone is 912-237-0145. You can always text or call. If you're not in my contact list, it's going to go straight to voicemail. So leave me a voicemail and I'll call you right back. I did figure out that secret about all those unknown calls coming to me.
Oh, yeah.
So,
oh, yeah. Anything else that we have not covered today?
I don't think
it all.
Yeah, that was pretty comprehensive. So again, I appreciate that. Hey, no, there was one big thing I missed.
Sure.
We were able to. It got cut when we were doing the 14% cut, and then we got it put in. We funded 2 federally qualified health care centers. They're known as FQHCs. They are wildly successful. We don't have one anywhere near here. We funded 2 this year. Guess where one of them is coming? To Wayne County.
Now, what is that exactly?
So it is a federally qualified health center. So what it does, it takes pressure off the local hospitals that for some of the indigent care and what we call frequent flyers, people that could be helped if they would, especially if they would take their medicine, like if they're diabetic, because a lot of people end up in an emergency room or at a clinic. There's a roller coaster because they're not doing self-care. Well, this helps with this. Hospitals love them. You would think it sounds like competition, but it's not. Mm-hmm. Hospitals love them. In fact, our hospital, and thanks to Joe Roddy, who did some creative stuff during the pandemic, was one of the supporters, and we all wrote letters and begged for them to bring that to Jessup. And so thanks to your local leadership, who actually this was an initiative out of the Wayne leadership group. And so kudos to everybody in Wayne County that fought hard and wrote letters and begged and pleaded. And so big win again for Wayne County.
And what is the time frame on that?
It's probably going to be a while because it's got the word federal in it. So you you tell me.
5 years?
Yeah. No, I think it'll be quicker than that.
Quicker than that.
So I think we'll see something next year. Yeah.
Well, that'll be good.
Yeah, that'll be great. So appreciate you asking.
Well, always welcome. Glad to have you in studio after a long session for you off and on. And looking forward to it anytime that you'd like to come in. Look forward to it next year as well.
All right. Well, thanks a bunch.
All right. Representative Bill Werkheiser on the world-famous Butch and Bob Show, brought to you by Murphy Builder Supply, First Southern Bank, and Damon's famous Fingers and Wings. Good morning from the Big Dog, WIFO at 8:30. Update from Fox News Radio coming up next.
Find new roads that lead to Woody Folsom Automotive in Baxley for the Chevy Open Road Sale and employee pricing on GMC and Buick. 2020 select Chevy